Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you guys are looking for PTC geocodes, including the new Astral Radiance set, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can use discount code Omnipoke for 5% off your order. Today we're going to be taking a look at the three tournaments that took place last weekend. There was Lille Regionals, Perth Regionals and New Jersey Regionals. All three of them had a huge amount of attendance, and we're kind of wrapping up this format, so it's really good to see where the format has finally settled. And just take a look at some of the lists that made top 8. We're going to kick things off with Lille. As you can see, I've picked up the CCG pie charts for each of these just to have a bit of a sort of overview of how the meta looks in the Day 2 field, because a couple of these tournaments don't actually have the full Day 2 sort of listed on Limitless yet. So as you can see, you'll see this is kind of a running trend. Arc Intel was the most popular archetype. I've kind of bunched all of these Arceus decks that play an Intelleon engine together, so Moltres, Beedrill, straight Arc Intel, like the Bird Box build, all of them together. Mew, second up, then other Arceus builds. This is generally the Beedrill build, so Beedrill with Gyarados, Beedrill with Lucario, as well as just the Arceus Duraludon as well. Intelleon Dark Box is kind of this one prize Intelleon Dark deck that Stefan Ivanov ended up winning the event with. That's sort of seen more and more success as the format's gone on. It's kind of been the new deck that's really popped up recently. Then we've just got Ice Rider, Whimsy, Rapid Mally, Shadow Rider Whimsy, and Rapid Urshiet rounding things off. So yeah, pretty interesting meta. Heading over to the actual decks over on Limitless, as you can see, Ivanov won, as I mentioned. It's going to be this sort of one prize Intelleon deck, like I say. It's an archetype that I think initially got off the ground with Alex Dow from CCG, a fellow teammate and friend of the channel. Managed to make points with it at EUIC. A couple of us played it. He was unfortunately for us, he was the only one that made points, despite all of us putting a bit of time into the deck, but that kind of really kicked things off. Then a lot of players played it in Bilbao, including Stefan himself. And then continued to further evolve the list, and as you can see, was able to win Lille Regionals with it, which is pretty impressive. Essentially, the core of the deck is just the Intelleon engine and scoop up nets and trying to really pick out combo pieces. You've then got just attackers for different moments in time, so you've got late game Moltres, you've got the Zapdos for Arceus matchups, you've got Rowlet for dealing with Sobbles and Decidueye and Dunsparces, sorry. You've got the Hooper for just sort of taking a tempo one prize KO. And then you've got things like Quick Shooting and Zigzagoon to help out with maths here and there. You've got there's even the water in here to be able to attack with the big Shady. Lots of different options, huge different like a plethora of different sort of supporting or supporter cards, and lots of different like one-time use cards. You've got the Power Pad, but you're picking and choosing the supporters for the right moment. The big sort of inclusion to his list this time was the Leon, which he said really helped reaching some numbers, especially with Moltres. You can get there a turn early with Leon or Choice Belt or a combination of both, along with Quick Shooting here and there. A lot of numbers that people aren't really playing around. Moltres is a very, very familiar card to people, but they know a lot of people know the breakpoints of the card now, so it's one of these where naturally it gets a little bit less valuable when you kind of know what you're playing around. So the Leon was included to try and help some of those, as well as just hitting some better numbers here and there, which is pretty cool. We initially played like a Cleansing Gloves for the Hooper to be able to get through a Oricorio, Meloetta, and a Malamar. You can do that with Leon. It uses your support for the turn, but it's way more flexible, which is cool. I think the list is pretty much here to stay. I don't think there's too much flexibility with the list. There's obviously in this type of deck a lot of cards can come in and out. You can play a lot of different sort of tech attackers. You can see the list works based off of, or the list has things like Raihan plus a small count of energy in here, so you can play different tech attackers for what you think is going to be sort of in the meta, which is pretty cool. I think he said now that Leon's kind of out there, it's a little bit less valuable because, again, it's just in people's minds. They kind of know to be playing around it now. But I think this deck is here to stay. I think it's a really solid archetype. I think it's quite a complex archetype. I think it takes a lot of sort of practice to know exactly what your deck is capable of, what's in your range at any point. And the rise of Jolteon does scare me a little bit in terms of wanting to play this kind of archetype. But I think it's a really, really solid one. Being a pretty much purely one prize deck, other than the Zapdos, is very, very strong because it just gives you plenty of time to build these combos, which is fantastic. So yeah, I think this is a real archetype. I think it's not just sort of a one-hit wonder. I think it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Second place was Kivong, who ended up playing the Arceus Gyarados Jolteon Bibarel deck. This deck initially did well in an online tournament last week, and it looks like Kivong took the list and kind of adapted it a little bit and went with it. Really impressive to see. I don't think Kivong lost a game until the finals, which is crazy. Went into cut something like 11:03, and then one top 8, one top 4. So by the finals was 13:03. Didn't lose a series all weekend, which is really impressive. Yeah, the idea of the deck is basically just off the back of Jolteon trying to chrome all of these Intelleon engines. Because you can't play the Intelleon engine yourself, you're kind of looking towards the more the Bibarel engine that the Arceus decks have played in the past. And then just because you're playing memory capsules for the Jolteon, you get additional synergy from... you can then kind of play any attack you want, but you get additional synergy from the memory capsules by playing Gyarados. Because you can copy the Gyarados V's Get Angry attack once you've tanked a hit with the V Max, which is really cool. So yeah, lots of like intertwining synergy here. We've seen this type of list in various different sort of instances. We've seen it with Malamar, we've seen it with all sorts of different Pokemon, but this was the successful one on the day. Yeah, it's slightly different from some of the other ones as well, just because it's a bit more reliant on Arceus to be able to set up the Gyarados. A lot of the sort of like the Malamar list is a bit different because a lot of the time you lose tempo early on, but you gain it back by sort of Marnie plus max jammering them and just getting rid of their hand and giving them no options, whereas this deck doesn't really do that. It just looks to lock down the opponent and just try and take 6 prizes quite quickly, hence sort of really having to lean in quite heavily into the Trinity Nova, hence having a couple of Melody and stuff here to be able to also get a Trinity Nova even if you miss an energy on the first turn. But yeah, again, a pretty solid archetype. I think these kind of Arceus Bibarel decks are definitely inferior to the Intel engine, but really can punish the Intel engine, so it's a great sort of second engine to play. I think there's plenty of different partners as well, so you can kind of pick your favourite VMAX or whatever and just pop it in, which is really cool. I'm still a bit of a bigger fan of the Intel engines, but I think I really would be put off of an Intel engine at the moment, just because I think after seeing this do well and seeing a couple of the American lists do well, a lot of people will be picking this up and trying it out. So yeah, I'm going to be avoiding Intelleon probably for a little bit. I don't know, I may end up playing it in Bremen this weekend, but I can see this list being really quite good in this kind of meta. It kind of forces all, like, the more this gets, the more the Jolteon, the more popular the Jolteon is, the worse the Jolteon gets, which is kind of funny. But yeah, pretty interesting list. Nothing too crazy. Not too different from the list that ended up doing well in the, I think it was a late night series. Jorge Salas was another sort of one prize dark build. This time played the Moltres V and the Medicham V. So yeah, you can see this deck has plenty of different options. You can play 2 prize attackers. I think typically it's a little bit spooky because you obviously lose that 1 prize edge. But some of these ones, especially the Medicham, because you have quick shooting plus Ziggy plus plenty of nets, plus even like Aqua Bullet. You know, there's plenty of ways to be able to get yourself into a Yoga Loop turn, which is pretty cool. Yeah, but honestly, the backbone of the deck is kind of like Rowlet Birdkeeper. And then just, like, that's your early game pressure, is trying to deal with the Sobbles and the Drizzles and that kind of stuff with Rowlet and Hooper. And then as you build more and more combos, you can really pop off. And then Lucas Calza was the other top 4 competitor who played Arc, Intel, Molt. So again, a pretty standard list. Nothing too crazy. The Energy Switch I do really like. I'm a huge fan of Energy Switch as a card anyway, but I think it's really nice. I also like the Capture Energies. Even though we are in a bit of a Beedrill meta right now, I still quite like the Captures. Just because the first Arceus is probably going to be powered up with a double turbo anyway, so you might as well just commit to a Capture. It's very rare that you're going to be able to go purely basic energy on your first Arceus anyway, so you might as well just commit to the Capture, get an extra Pokemon out. 2 double turbo is a bit spooky, but obviously we have Starbirth to help it out. And only 1 Stadium is also a bit spooky. I think this list it's a pretty cool list, but I think going forward you really need to respect Path a little bit more, especially because all of the other Arc decks are playing, like all of the Arc Bibarel decks are playing Path. With only 1 training court, it's kind of spooky. It's hard for them to have their dream turn of like Path plus Jolteon, but Path plus Jolteon basically completely locks you out of the game. Even sometimes a Path locks you out of the game. So yeah, I think I definitely try and find space for a second stadium. Obviously the dark stuff does eat into your spaces. But yeah, maybe sort of like the energy switch and the energy retrieval can go. Double Clara plus energy retrieval is quite a lot of recovery, as well as the training court. So I'd say probably one of those can go. I think I like cutting the retrieval over anything else just for another stadium, because Clara can be useful for grabbing Dunsparce and Manaphy back, which I still think is pretty important in this meta, to be honest. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. No health buff either, no big charms or anything, which kind of makes sense. A lot of the Moltres builds tend to stay away from it just because they're not like pure Sharon's Care focus builds. But again, I still think Big Charm is a pretty solid card at the moment. Maze Brenningmeyer is another teammate of mine who played the Dark Intel deck. Doesn't have his list out there at the moment, but again, it was fairly similar. We had Stephen Kent playing Arceus Duraludon. Again, this list hasn't really evolved too much. It's essentially very close to where it was, even right at the start of the meta. This time opting for the 4 Poké Gears, as well as 4 Tower of Darkness, not playing any sort of Crystal Caves or anything like that, any collapsed stadiums, just going for the pure draw, identifying that the deck can be a little bit sort of bricky and inconsistent here and there, so electing to go for a little bit of added consistency makes a lot of sense. But yeah, pretty much like a pretty standard list, to be honest. Nothing too crazy there. The one choice belt was kind of interesting. Feels kind of weird just because I don't really know what numbers it definitely helps out. It helps you hit like 210 with your first Arceus, but there's no 220, which is kind of weird. 250 on a Duraludon doesn't feel overly relevant. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the choice belt. I prefer like a second Big Charm or something. And yeah, only 3 Quick Ball also is a bit scary because you basically lose if you don't get Arceus down turn 1 because you have to Starbirth turn 2 because the deck is so inconsistent. So I think I'd like to find space for another Quick Ball. I like the switch in the rope. 1 Rod I feel like isn't super standard either. So yeah, slightly unconventional list, but I like nothing too crazy. Pretty much the deck has been figured out for a long time. Owen Kammerman played Arcintel Bees. Again, I also really like the Bees right now. I think there's plenty of special energy in the meta, to be honest. So I think it makes a lot of sense. There's, I mean, Bees is definitely respected. There's lists. I don't know that we'll see any today, but there's definitely been lists of like Mew and even Arceus playing like a big Parasol just to get around that first Persist Sting from Beedrill, which is pretty interesting. So it's definitely well respected. Yeah, I really like the list. I like this version of Beedrill more than the Bibarel version because you rely so much less on your Starbirth to be able to get the mustard out because of Shady Dealings. It means that you can still quite happily Starbirth for a KO a lot of the time, which is great. So yeah, I think that's really important. Again, I'm still a big fan of Capture Energy while in these Arc builds, just because a lot of the time the Beedrill's taking a KO anyway. I don't necessarily think you need to play more than 2. 1 is completely fine, but yeah, I like the Capture for sure. Yeah, again, just sort of trying to be as consistent as possible, trying to find the mustard as early as possible without having to Starbirth is pretty cool. Identifying that there's not that many turns you can research in this deck is also pretty interesting. You have to spend an extra turn, or you have to spend a turn mustarding, and then from there you're sort of bossing, Sharoning, or Marnieing. So the 1 research also makes sense to me, just because typically like your first supporter is probably research, but then Marnie, Boss, and Sharon are kind of the rest of the game, unless there's a right hand weaved in here and there. And a lot of the time you want to weave in a mustard in the first instance anyway. So yeah, I like that as well. But yeah, nothing too crazy. Still playing Dunsparce Manaphy, still respecting all of the different ways that people are targeting Arceus right now. And then rounding out the top 8 was Ice Rider Calyrex with Intelleon. Ice Rider's in a really, really interesting spot, basically because Arceus has got so popular. Ice Rider's damage is crazy good at the moment. So yeah, I really like Ice Rider in this meta. It's a little bit worse now. The Intelleon engine's being targeted a bit more. But with, like people's hard counter to Whims hasn't just been playing a metal attacker, which I think Ice Rider was also a bit scared of. And it's finally hit this meta where Mew isn't overly popular. You've still got paths to try and like crumb them. Like Marnie Path can still definitely win a game against Mew, but we know it's not anywhere near as sort of consistent as of a win con as it needs to be to have a reliable Mew matchup. But it's a win con nonetheless. So yeah, Ice Rider's found this like really sweet spot where we're in a meta where Arceus is incredibly popular. Mew at the time was kind of on the decline just because it wasn't like performing overly well. It was still performing great, but in general, people had started moving more towards Arceus variants. So Ice Rider hit a really nice sweet spot for this tournament, and like you saw in the graph, like 4 or 5 made day 2. So yeah, really nice pickup. I really like the Scrapper, Leon, and Choice Belt. 3 different ways of being able to access a KO on an Arceus is really good. It means that you can combine any 2 of these 3 ways to be able to KO a big charmed Arceus, which I think is pretty important. Yeah, you just trade really well into Arceus. I still don't think it has a fantastic Mew matchup, but it just keeps Arceus honest, which is pretty cool. I have a feeling it would be fairly poor into the it wouldn't even be that poor into the Jolteon builds because you have Tool Scrapper. You have ways to find the Tool Scrapper. Well, you don't, but like you can find the Tool Scrapper early enough to be able to just hold it and get rid of their memory capsule. You've got a couple of boss, so it wouldn't actually be like this is the only Arc build currently, not Arc, but this is the only deck currently that's playing Tool Scrapper like as quote unquote standard, I guess. And like Arcs are going to be looking towards maybe trying to play Scrapper anyway, so it probably actually has a decent Jolteon matchup, which is cool. I really like Ice Rider. I keep saying Arc because Arc Ice Rider in my head is also pretty good. But yeah, Ice Rider seems like in a really good position, to be honest. I don't know whether it would be great going forward, just because it kind of depends on that wave of popularity of Mew. If Mew like didn't overperform, but there was a lot of decks in a lot of these tournaments that Mew would have done really well in, and when we get to the American results, you'll see that Mew, like 3 Mews top 8'd at least. So yeah, Mew could get a bit more popular this week, which would scare me off Calyrex a little bit, but in a world full of Arceus, Ice Rider is definitely king, which is really cool. On to Perth. Let me grab the Perth breakdown. This is the Perth top 16. They only had a top 8, but I was able to get the top 16 decks just so it gives a bit of a better meta review. As you can see, Arceus Intelleon won the event. But because this was a bit smaller of a pie chart, I actually split up the Intel variants into Beedrill, straight Intelleon, and Intelleon Moltres. So yeah, Beedrill was the most popular. Beedrill actually did really well. There was four Beedrill in top 8, which is pretty impressive. Arcintel, the 2 Arcintels in top 8, in top 16 were both made it to top 8, and one of them ended up winning. And then just kind of the standard stuff: Mew, Malamar, Inteleon, Darkbox, and Wims. And then there was a Stonejourner in top 16 as well. Obviously, Super Fringe managed to maintain a positive record. I wouldn't say it's going to be particularly meta, but was able to squeak into the top 16, which is impressive. But yeah, Matthew Burris was the winner of Perth Regionals, playing a deck, I believe him and Henry named Alien X. I don't know where the Alien is. I assume it's maybe the Arceus or something, but the X is definitely those 2 cross switches that was included. Essentially, the sort of mindset from my understanding is cross switcher plus Sharon's Care is incredibly powerful. Cross switcher plus Melanie is incredibly powerful, going from sort of a lone Arceus on the bench to being able to KO an important Pokemon on the following turn with no energy, which is pretty good. So yeah, just being able to boss plus another supporter is great. Played the Collapsed as well as the Avery to try and help sort of limit people's bench as well, which is very nice. Again, in combination with that cross switcher, being able to limit your opponent's resources and also try and punish them a little bit with an additional boss out, quote unquote. Makes sense with the Intellion engine as well. You're actually able to find it compared to some of these other decks, which is cool. The Power Pad kind of helps with the healing here and there, because you've got the Sharon's Care. I still would love to see this feels like a tanky build of Arceus, right? So I wouldn't have minded seeing a second Sharon's Care, but yeah, that makes sense. The Echoing Horn is also an interesting one. I would imagine it's just for stealing games because you've got you've got plenty of ways to gust in this deck. You've got the additional cross switches plus double boss and Power Pad. So being able to Echoing Horn for another 2 prizer, maybe able to punish another Zapdos or something, makes a lot of sense. There's no great ways of dealing 220 here. So some of the typical V Pokemon may be a little bit out of range for the Echoing Horn. You're going to have quick shooting out or something to be able to do that, but yeah, in general, I would imagine it was just for sort of trying to punish a particularly, well, any V Pokemon that your opponent was trying to hide from you and just go one prize route, because I think one prize route is one of the better ways to deal with this kind of deck. They only have typically Shady Dealings Intelleon to be able to try and go toe-to-toe 1v1 against you, so yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think the switches will become standard per se, just because I think... I mean, I don't think it'll become standard just because I think it is still trying to piece a lot together, and it's two spaces, which is actually quite a lot of spaces in this kind of deck, where I feel like a lot of the cards are just trying to, like, this whole deck is built around being like super consistent, right? And there's arguably like one less Drizzile and maybe not a Ziggy or something in here that would help smooth the deck out a little bit in the early turns, in favour for some more like power spike cards. So I can see them not being too standard, but I like the inclusion. It's pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool deck. Again, identifying that Capture is really good in the deck right now, just because if you're going to get KO'd by a Beedrill anyway, you might as well get an extra Pokemon for your time. I didn't see who this was. Who was this? This was Marco Giovannini. Marco Giovannini. I am sorry if I'm butchering your name. Was the second place Arc Beedrill list. Again, pretty similar to the list we looked at earlier. I don't know Sharon's Care, but in general, just super similar to Owen's list previously. I think, like I say, this is still my favourite way to play Beedrill. This is still actually my favourite way to play Arc Intel at the moment. I prefer this over the dark stuff. Just a little bit, just because it feels great being able to muster out a Beedrill. So yeah, that was the second place list. Natalie Miller back again after her win earlier in the year. Back again, top 4ing, fantastic player. Another Arc Beedrill, Arc Intel Beedrill. This time playing a Crobat as well. I don't mind the Crobat. Again, you don't get to the luxury of playing like the typical research to hyper draw in your early turns. So being able to Crobat off of the back of a Mustard gives you an additional little bit of draw. I think Crobat is a bit of a liability at the moment, which is sort of awkward, but it does, like, it feels like it's just one of those cards which you play when you're absolutely panicking. So yeah, having that option is pretty nice. No captures, again, I'm still a big fan of captures, but in general, those looks pretty solid. Just being able to, yeah, Beedrill without Starbirth is way better than having to Starbirth for Beedrill, because it means that you, even like playing things like the Sharon's Care and stuff like that later on down the line, it means you still have Starbirth open to you later on to have one of these real power spike turns to try and win. We don't have the Mew list that made top 8. Stephen Kirk, I know a couple of these lists were the same. Looks like not this one though. Stephen Kirk's list played a Zapdos V, pretty spicy. I can see the use in Zapdos V. It still feels like you're kind of good into Arceus anyway because of the tempo that Beedrill gives you. Admittedly, this stops them going from like a purely like this then counters their second Arceus, right? When they attach 3 basic energy, you've still got another quick way of dealing with it, which is pretty cool. I feel like typically a lot of the time though, they don't put a third Arceus down, at least straight away, so it's kind of hard to use that Zapdos unless you've been able to Trinity Nova to it, which is hard because then it just gets KO'd. So I feel like it's not the easiest Pokemon to use, but sometimes they have to put the second Arceus down because you KO their first Arceus, they have a second Arceus to Trinity Nova 2, but they want to like Sharon's Care into another Arceus or something, so maybe a lot of the time there is a third Arceus down, and that means they don't get to Sharon's Care as well as you just get to Thunderous Kick them. So yeah, it's a nice sort of like secondary way of beating Arceus. Once you've had the big tempo of that first Beedrill, you then have the sort of mid-game tempo of the Zapdos, which is pretty nice. It can actually mean, I guess, that you can go completely Arceus-less in the mirror sometimes, or at least save Arceus until the late game, which is pretty cool because then you can just, you know, boss up another 2-prizer in the late game or something, rather than having to play this like tug of war with the first 2 Arceus and, you know, Sharon's Caring here and there. So yeah, pretty nice inclusion. Yeah, I like this list. I like all of these Arc Intel Bees lists. I'm a big fan. Henry played the same list as Matthew. Aaron played Rapid Mally. I think I had a look at this list and it was fairly standard. Played the Boss, played the Rope, but nothing too untoward outside. Played double shady dealings rather than one shady, one quick shooting, which I think is fine. I don't hate double shady dealings just because shady dealings oftentimes unlocks your whole deck and you basically never want to prize it. But it is a bomb at the end of the day. You can see that he's respected the Drizzles being bombs and is only playing 3. So I guess yeah, it's a bomb, but I don't. It's like the least bad bomb, I guess, because it at least filters out your deck for the good cards. I do quite like quick shooting though, just because it really helps smooth over some numbers. And then finally, Jeremy Lim also played. Oh, this was the same list as Natalie's. So yeah, plenty of Beedrill in Perth. I remember Matthew called himself Matty B the Beekeeper after beating 3 Arc Intel Bees in the run-up to the finals, which is pretty funny. Or, well, into the run-up of winning the event, which is pretty good. Finally, we had the New Jersey Regional. Again, you can see the meta was pretty similar to the Perth meta. There was a couple of differences, but in general, Arc Intelleon was way outclassing pretty much everything else. You have the other Arceus variants were slightly more popular than Mew. There's plenty of Bibarel variants with Crobat and Malamar and this, that, and the other. There was also a couple of Arceus Charizards as well as an Arceus Duraludon. So yeah, again, more different partners for Arceus. You can really see how varied he makes the meta. We've got over 50% of the meta being Arceus in different forms, which is pretty interesting. Mew rounding out sort of the plus 20% decks, plus 15% decks, and then very similar to what we saw in Lille, as well as the other portion being basically Suicune, Ludicolo, Gengar, and a couple of other sort of more niche Inteleon decks. There was Rapid Strike Inteleon, as well as, I believe, one Dark Box. So yeah, very, very similar metas between the two tournaments. That kind of shows us that the meta has started to hone in on basically its like final evolutions ahead of Astral Radiance being released. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. First place was won by Luke Smith, who played Arceus Bibarel Crobat with a Hooper and a Zamazenta, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm still not sold on Arceus Bibarel's sort of consistency. It's definitely spooky, but things like Marnie Path, you can see 4 Marnie and 3 Path. You kind of get that you're just trying. This deck's just trying to slow opponents down, trying to not necessarily win in the early turns, but just get into the game and then try and win off the back of like a Marnie Path. Double Sharon's Care is also really interesting, trying to out-heal, trying to be tanky, trying to out-heal, and then just throw up some of these other Pokemon that typically would count or would try and counter the deck. The Hooper in here for Urshi, as well as some like other Dark Weak stuff as well. But primarily you've got things like Crobat V for that, and then you've also got the Zamazenta V taking on Whimsicott, as well as sort of catching Ice Rider in the crossfire. But I'm pretty sure Whimsicott will have been the one in mind here. But yeah, a fairly sort of like there's not many bells and whistles with the list. It's just trying to be a bit of a disruptive Arceus build, tanky in the early turns until you can get into this Marnie Path combo, and then trying to Marnie Path your way to big stuff and stuff that takes extra prizes or stuff that takes weakness. As well as in the matchups where you're not getting one of these weaknesses, just trying to out-heal yourself compared to other Arceus builds because you're playing double Sharon's Care plus Power Pad compared to one Sharon's Care plus Power Pad. So yeah, pretty good. Obviously you've got the Hooper in here, but it does feel a little bit scary not playing Manaphy. Because I think Urshi won't... There's no way to hide a Hooper, right? So Urshi just won't use Urshi until it wins the game with it, which is the kind of scary thing. There's no Dark Patch or anything in this format, so you can't surprise an Urshi at all, which is a bit spooky because I think Urshi could still pretty much... Like, you only have to take 3 prizes for Urshi is doing a huge amount here, especially because you're naturally probably playing Crobat in the early turns just because the deck is not as consistent without an Intel engine, so still feels like Urshi's a bit of a rough matchup. But you do have Hooper to be able to just Trinity Nova and charge to it and say basically you can't do this until you're winning the game because I'm just gonna return KO for 3 prizes. Admittedly, you can also just like gust up their Urshis with the Hooper, or even with Arceus and stuff like that. But it feels like if they put double Urshi down on the turn and then take a KO going down to 3 prizes, it's pretty brutal for you. But yeah, other than that, again, no sort of bells and whistles, just trying to get into the game. It's a bit scary with this kind of deck, just like only playing, not getting to play things like Intelleon and stuff. It feels like your outs are way less. That's why I'd like to see like a third Evo Incense and maybe a capture or something, just to try and guarantee having access to Starbirth should you need it. But like double Crobat helps with that. You have the barrel that you can draw into, and you've got 6 draw supporters compared to like arguably like the 4 sometimes Arceus not naturally plays in like a double research, double mining, because things like right-handed counters draw supporters. So yeah, it's kind of fine. It scares me a little bit, but it's kind of fine. There's like enough outs, but I would probably try and find space for like a third Evo Instance or something. But yeah, pretty interesting list. Taking down the tournament, congratulations, Luke. Peter Kika won, didn't win, got 2nd place with a pretty similar list to the one we just looked at. Also playing a Hooper V. Hooper V is, again, a really interesting one. I feel like it's like a checkmate Pokemon for some of these Urshi builds, but I just don't feel it works hugely in this meta outside of like Arkintel Molt, where you've got other dark attackers in there anyway. Like, it feels like you're investing a lot into this Hooper just for the Urshi matchup, which is kind of scary to me. Yeah, I'm not like the biggest fan of just the random Hooper tech. It feels like it's becoming more standard. But when you're not playing dark, like it makes sense when you're playing dark energy anyway, I think. But it doesn't make sense to, or I think it makes less sense to try and jam it into a list that isn't actually playing dark energy. For me, at least, just because you're taking like there'll be times where you'll have wished you've been playing more grass energy or whatever. But yeah, that's the only thing for me. I feel like Hooper makes sense in the dark deck, but trying to jam it in as a dark package makes less sense than trying to like find space for the Moltres package. Admittedly, the Moltres package takes more space, I guess, but I feel like it's more reliable because it doesn't rely on a turn with Arceus first. So yeah, but yeah, the list looks. Other than that, the list looks pretty good. I really do like. The more I think about the Zapdos thing, the more I really like it. So it's. I'm glad to see someone else playing the Zapdos thing. It's really nice. Yeah, again, lots of options, lots of access to different things. I again wouldn't mind seeing like a Zigzagoon or something. So I think I'd probably maybe shift off the Hooper package and just maybe try and get myself a space back, changing the energy count and trying to... Yeah, I'd probably just like slightly adjust the energy count, I think, and take out the Hooper. And this list looks really good. Like I say, I really like the Zapdos Beedrill sort of synergy with one another, so that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, pretty cool list. Not the biggest fan of the Hooper stuff. I think it is a little bit clunky, but yeah, other than that, really like it. Nothing too crazy about the 3rd place Arc Intel list. There is one fan of Waves, which is interesting. I feel like we'd moved away from the fan of Waves thing, just because Double Turbo is like... Initially, it was used as like a Mew counter, right? But Fan of Waves, so I thought we moved away from it, but then the more I thought about Fan of Waves, it's actually really, really big on dealing with an Arceus, just because, especially in a build where you could tutor it out with Starbirth and Drizzles and stuff, because a lot of Arceus like turn 1 is just attaching a double turbo. So if you're going second, you can try and find the Fan of Waves early, which is hard, but if you're going first, you can put them back a turn, like even further by a turn. So if you go like it feels like a bit of a win more card in the Arceus Mirror if you're going first anyway. But I think it is like a really back-breaking card in the Arceus Mirror, which is pretty interesting, especially if people are trying out more capture energies and stuff. Again, I'd like to see a capture energy in here maybe. But admittedly, with the Melanie, you're actually not guaranteed to have your first Arceus be be used with a double turbo. So actually, maybe it makes less sense in this build, just because you can quite happily just attach a water to a V on turn 1, and then turn 2 you can just attach with Melanie and not be worried about Beedrill at all. Especially with an Intel engine, it's actually way more plausible. So yeah, maybe Capture Energy doesn't make as much sense in this build, which is fair enough. Yeah, I like the double Sharon's Care and the double Big Charm. I like being tanky right now. The only thing that is kind of scary is obviously there's no recovery for Dunsparce, so opponents that can deal with a Dunsparce is kind of annoying. Oh, there's a Rod, what am I saying? There's a Rod right there. It's not as immediate, I guess, but Rod is enough. It's like the best you can play if you're not playing a reason. Like, Clara doesn't make sense in a build like this, just because I think you need... It naturally fits into the dark builds anyway, just because it combos so well with Moltres. But even not in the dark builds, it grabs Dunsparce plus Manaphy, which is really big. But it doesn't make sense in this build, so you kind of have to. You're kind of locked at playing like a Rod, or even like a Rescue Carrier, just to try and maybe I wouldn't mind Rescue Carrier a little bit more because it helps. It lets you discard things like Sobbles and Drizzles early as well if they get if the Sobbles get KO'd and stuff early. But the additional usage of energy is also pretty important, especially when you're kind of locked in attacking with 3 Arceus in this deck. You can sometimes weave in an Aqua Bullet here, but you're gonna need your energy. And in a world where you're trying to avoid double turbo as much as possible just because of Beedrill, Rod makes a lot of sense, and also just trying to get some energy back and trying to make it so that you only need one Arceus to have a double turbo on it. You've got enough to be able to Trinity Nova with 2 fully basic energy Arceus is pretty good. So yeah, I quite like this though. I think this is quite similar to what I would play if I was playing straight Arc Intel, I think. Vincent was the top 4 player playing Mew. I'm pretty sure all 3 of the builds are playing Catcher builds. I feel like Catcher is basically standard now, which grosses me out a little bit because I don't want to play more flip cards. I don't like playing Crams anyway. I always preferred playing phones, and now you have to cut the phones to play more flip cards. But the amount of tempo you gain, especially against Arceus, is crazy when you flip heads on a Catcher going second. You're basically... Other than like Marnie Path cheese stuff, I feel like you're basically in an unlosable position up against Arceus when that comes off. So yeah, it's gross. It's standard, which is annoying. But yeah, I don't like it. But it's just the way the meta's formed. Playing the Pumpkaboo as well, so even less likely to get Marnie Path cheesed, which is cool. Now we're moving back to Fog Crystal and Double Psychics. Just because of Beedrill and Whimsicott and stuff. I really like the one Pumpkaboo. So yeah, other than me hating that you have to play catchers now, this is a pretty cool list. The one big Parasol as well that I mentioned that some people had been playing, looks like it has made its way into Vincent's list as well to, again, further help out against things like Beedrill. Travis was the 6th place list, and I believe Zachary or 5th, and Zachary was the 6th. They played the same 60 again, catcher build. They did jam phones in here though, which I really like, just because I still think phone is really strong in Mew. 2 stadiums is kind of spooky, but it's more allowed with phones though. I would say it's more like I would want to find space for Pumpkaboo and Fog if I was only going to 2 stadiums. You'd probably have to cut something like a phone. Yeah, I mean the catch, like not the problem is, but one of the things about the catches is they do take up more space. You have to cut a boss and a rope, which is 2 cards, but then you have to cut like one other card, which for me was like a stadium. So you make yourself a little bit worse against Path, especially if you're not playing the Fog Crystal Pumpkin package, which I'd like. But Path is like going back into people's decks. It's increasing a little bit. But yeah, it still feels like it's, because of that, it still feels like it's worth respecting. So yeah, you can see Zachary's list was also the same. 60. We then had this looks like it was the same list. Oh yeah, Justin Coulis and Charlie Kerr played the same list, as well as a couple of other placements. So yeah, great result for the top 8 list. And then finally Andrew Denkus, who played Arc Intel as well. No fan of waves this time. Again, a pretty standard build. Nothing too crazy. Double Sharon's Care and Palpad. Nothing particularly different. I think one of the only cards different is just the Manaphy, which is pretty cool. So yeah, feels like Arc Intel, like the tanky build of Arc Intel, is pretty figured out now. Can't see it adapting too much going forward. The only other list I wanted to take a quick look at was Justin Kim's Rapid Intel list. Look at this. Basically a Marnie Path cheese deck, but also you've got Cheryl in here. Only 3 Rapid Strike energy. This is a deck I'm really, really interested in. I might end up playing it this weekend for Bremen just because it looks like a lot of fun. The 3 VIP pass is kind of wild. But yeah, I think the deck is really interesting. I like playing a couple of waters in the deck just because I always like the thought of being able to like double gunner plus quick shooting stuff. But I would also play the list differently in general because I'd probably be playing a much thinner VMAX line and try and play it a bit more like Rapid Urshi. But yeah, I think the deck is really cool. I might end up playing it this weekend, so I just wanted to show off the list because I think it's really nice. There's still some creativity going on in this format, which is great to see. Let's take a look at one of these Arc Charizard lists as well. Look at this. Like I say, still a bit of creativity as the format winds down is always good to see. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. Pretty interesting results, to be honest. I can't see things being too different going forward for the last couple of weeks of tournaments, but you never know. There's still plenty of points on the line. There's still stipends and stuff on the line. There's still Worlds Day 2 on the line. So people will be doing their best to try and take down these tournaments, so there will still be creativity here and there. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in a video again soon. Cheers.